world where tech's on the rise. We've got the latest scoop, open your eyes. From ChatGPT+Search is who's so wise, to Apple's AI touching the skies. It's the last week in AI swing through.
Hello and welcome to the Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear us chat about what's going on with AI. And as always, in this episode, we will be summarizing and discussing some of last week's most interesting AI news. And as always, you can also check out our text newsletter at Last Week in AI with even more AI news we will not be touching on in here. I am one of your hosts, Andrei Kronikov. My background is that I studied AI at Stanford, and I now work at a generative AI startup.
And hey, everybody. My name is Jeremy Harris. My background is that I just had a baby. And for that reason, that's not my whole background, but it's a particularly relevant one. So we were going to record this episode last week on Friday, as we normally do. We're doing it on a Tuesday because Andre very generously bumped it when I found out I was going to be spending like about 24 hours in the hospital with my newborn. Everything's fine. Everything's totally fine. Just a standard newborn scare. But so for that reason, I'm sort of playing catch up a little bit. You're going to get my takes a little bit hotter, a little bit spicier, less baked. As what I guess those are kind of contradictory things to say. You get it. You get my metaphors.
Less precompiled, more runtime compilation.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, more, like inference time compute over training time compute. Whatever analogy works for you.
There you go.
That's what we'll be doing. So Andre's very diligently added a bunch of stories like from between the hospital stay and now, and so I'll be flying by the seat of my pants on that stuff. I do apologize, but you'll get to see, I guess, my terrible thought process in action. Super excited to be here, and I guess so much stuff did happen, so there's a lot to cover.
That's right. Yeah, let me do a quick preview of the episode. So it's a bit of a mixed bag of stuff this week. There's no one unifying theme. Tools and apps, a big story, of course, is search in ChatGPT, and we also have Apple Intelligence, applications and business. Some of those regular themes we've seen with OpenAI and their hardware, with autonomous driving and Meta and others striking deals with media providers. Then on to research and advancements. We'll actually be highlighting something in robotics that I'm excited about, and also some evaluation type things. Policy and safety, our usual kind of grab bag of different things, some opinions as to policy, and also some research. That's pretty interesting. So that's the preview, but before we start on the news, real quick, as always, do want to give a shout out to the listeners who provided feedback and comments. I do look at YouTube and try to sort of be aware of anything people say on there, and I do also periodically check reviews on Apple Podcasts, and it's been really nice to see a few more come in. In fact, one of them actually congratulated Jeremy on your newborn daughter, which is cool.
That's very sweet.
Yeah, that's now forever part of the Apple podcast review. And it's also interesting in these reviews to hear about people's backgrounds. So there's a couple of these that say, for instance, there's an immigration lawyer and founder of a company making AI products for the legal profession. There is a senior tech and finance executive. Stuff like that. It's actually really interesting to see the kinds of people that are interested in this and are benefiting from it.
Yeah, it's actually kind of wild when I'll run into it in my line of work in different ways where people will say, "Oh yeah, I heard about this ball," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's funny. We just covered that on this podcast." They'll be like, "Yeah, that's where I heard it," which is always kind of amusing and cool. So really do appreciate the reach outs and. It's amazing. I'll tell you, I mentioned this, I think, last week, but it actually feels like a community. The number of messages that came out, like, hey, good luck with the baby and that sort of thing is very, very sweet and thoughtful. And anyway, it makes it so much easier to put in the 5 hours or whatever it is to prepare for each episode. And we really do appreciate it, and glad that some people find it useful.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll think about starting a Discord or something if people want to make a Last Week in AI community and discuss AI news. I'm just throwing that out there, totally, top of brain. But if you would like that, you can feel free to let us know. And then one last thing before diving into the news. As with the last episode, we do have a sponsor to acknowledge, and that sponsor is The Generator, an interdisciplinary AI lab focused on entrepreneurial AI from Babson College. Babson College, if you don't know, is the #1 school for entrepreneurship in the US. And this is a new initiative with professors from different departments there organizing this new kind of interdisciplinary lab that has various groups focusing on, for instance, AI entrepreneurship and business innovation, AI ethics and society, the future and worker talent, these sorts of things. They also focus things like peer training, people across Babson's faculty. They are fans of a podcast, actually, and it's a cool sponsor, as I said last episode, because there's no product here for you to buy. They just want to kind of spread awareness about this new initiative. And this week, there's a fun thing they did want to shout out. Some students of theirs are leading this event, a build-a-thon with Microsoft, where they'll be doing stuff on entrepreneurship and AI. So these sorts of cool initiatives, I guess, we'll be calling out and just making sure people know that this is a thing. Alrighty, well, that's it. Let's dive into the news, starting as usual with tools and apps. And the first story, as I previewed, will be search in ChatGPT. So OpenAI has had Search GPT in beta as a sort of preview, and they have now launched it live as a feature in ChatGPT. So the way this would work is ChatGPT can itself decide to search for information across the web to answer a query, or you can manually tell it to search for stuff on the web when it replies to your chat. So it's actually directly built into the normal ChatGPT experience. There's no separate thing like Search GPT to use. And it's very much similar to things like Perplexity, to things like AI overviews from Google. These other kind of offerings that let you input a query. The algorithms will find the relevant news stories from various sources on the web, and then that will be fed into the LLM to be able to generate a response with awareness of these various news sources. And as with these other things, of course, it'll be citing its sources, letting you know the links to go back to the original and read about them. So as with the other things, this is pretty important. ChatGPT knowledge was limited to the past, to like 2023, I believe. And so now it will be able to talk to you about kind of anything that's going on now, I suppose.
Yeah, there were a couple of interesting little tidbits too dropped into this. So, one is when asked what the technology behind this, the models behind this were, there was a rep who said, well, it's a mix of technologies, including Microsoft's Bing. So that's sort of an interesting point of deeper integration between OpenAI and, so Microsoft's Bing, right, is really OpenAI's some version of GPT-4 that's probably been tweaked. But one of the interesting things here is it's unclear whether this crosses the blood-brain barrier. Is OpenAI actually using some proprietary Microsoft products? And if so, that kind of deepens the dependency of OpenAI on Microsoft, right? If Search GPT becomes a breakaway product, if it allows OpenAI to take a bite out of that sweet multi-trillion-dollar search revenue market, then that's a really interesting thing to bind itself to OpenAI to Microsoft with. So there's that. There's also the fact, apparently, the underlying search model is a fine-tune of GPT-4o. So at least one part of the stack here includes that. And they did an initial test rollout with 10,000 users and seems to have gone well. So now they're doing the wider release. But interesting that they're choosing this stack, GPT-4o. So we're going to probably get that multimodal functionality as well, kind of more and more deeply integrated over time. But right now, that seems to be where they're going, using existing technologies and maybe a partnership with Microsoft to access Bing to kind of supplement all this, because Microsoft has all that experience. Questions, of course, as usual, right? Anytime we get into generative search, what about the price point, right? What is the cost going to be to OpenAI to serve these models? Because generative search is so much more expensive. You're actually generating text, and that's going to be figured out. They say currently there's no plan to advertise in ChatGPT, because this will all be through the ChatGPT interface. So obviously, it's not like you're going to search.chatgpt.com or whatever. You're just doing ChatGPT, and then within that, your searches will be routed appropriately. But they are flagging there are going to be some limits on how often people can use the free version of this search tool. So, again, a bit of a question as to whether this is Google or whether it's Perplexity, right? Are you gonna pay for a certain level of search? Like, how does that all shake out? And then how are ads going to be displayed and all that stuff? Anyway, kind of interesting as well, as they point out in the article, that this is dropping just a couple days before today, which is the presidential election in the United States. The need for accuracy, the interesting marketing choice, really, because if things go wrong with generative search, say today, and there's a big story, that's a pretty risky time to be doing this, when presumably they could have just waited a week and launched it then. But, I guess OpenAI just choosing to ship, as they so often do. And there you have it.
Right. And, maybe they decided to just do it last week so that it's not eclipsed by other news in the US. That could be part of it.
That doesn't sound right. I mean, OpenAI would never make these kinds of decisions on the basis of marketing.
Yeah, it's not like they're now a business that cares about PR.
No.
And actually, on that note, it's funny because I did try it out a little bit. I compared Perplexity and this ChatGPT with search on informing myself about the local candidates and elections that I'll need to be voting for in Palo Alto. So I just, there's a lot of candidates for city council. There's 12 of them. It's kind of hard to get an overview.
Right.
So it's actually, both of these things I found quite useful for that. I would say Perplexity is right now better for these sorts of, let's say, more intricate research tasks that require summarizing a lot of information. ChatGPT was decent, but didn't present the information quite as well. At the same time, if you're already using ChatGPT and paying for it, I could definitely see this being a reason for you to not pay for Perplexity, which could be a real problem for Perplexity. I guess we'll see.
Yep, search is heating up.
Next up, Apple Intelligence. Their features are now rolling out in beta. So this is a developer beta version of iOS 18.2. And there are these Apple Intelligence features that are set up to be publicly available next week, I guess probably this week. As we've already seen in previews, the features have things like integrated writing tools, image cleanup, article summaries, and a redesigned Siri experience with typing input. Although this is not the smarter Siri with LLM integration. And then the developer beta users can access extra features like Genmoji, Image Playground, Visual Intelligence, Image Wand, and ChatGPT integration that will roll out to users a bit later. So we've already covered this, I suppose, at the announcement time, that Apple's approach to AI is to not have sort of one big thing in their iOS ecosystem, instead having AI kind of across their OS in various ways, kind of as features really, rather than one big AI. And now you're seeing some of those features come out.
Yeah, and it's also that they seem to be going for much more of that platform play, right? It's very Apple to do this, be the integrator, lean on the hardware as the thing that's driving value. And there's a bit of in that sense, a Microsoft question, I guess. That there's this notion that you want to commoditize the complement to your technology, right? So famously, Microsoft, they make operating systems and now software for PCs. The complement to that, which is a bit counterintuitive, is the hardware that actually runs it. So you make dirt cheap hardware, and where you really get your margins is on the software. Apple, in a certain sense here, maybe going for the opposite play, as they have been with higher end hardware. It kind of makes them a more natural integration point for a wide range of different technologies, not just leading with, hey, it's just Apple products. So that's why they have a lot of partnerships with the likes of OpenAI. And anyway, so there's interesting kind of further push in that direction strategically for Apple.
onto the lightning round. And speaking of that relationship between OpenAI and Microsoft, the story we have is that GitHub Copilot will now support models from Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI. So as a developer, GitHub Copilot is for coding. It gives you suggestions, AI suggestions, as you write a code. Now, as a developer, you can choose whatever model you want from things like Claude 3.5, Gemini 1.5 Pro, and OpenAI's GPT-4o, O1 Preview, and O1 Mini. This is interesting because GitHub Copilot so far has had just one model. There's no ability to choose, and that model seemingly was built on top of OpenAI technology, trained with data from across GitHub. So this kind of allows Microsoft to be pals with more companies, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is more evidence for, I'm biased, but I'm beating this drum, for the idea that your LLM class is increasingly becoming commoditized, right? So you're starting to see the leverage shift from the frontier companies to the aggregators. So, like you've got OpenAI, Anthropic, you've got, Google products, all these competing on one platform. And you can almost feel in that moment, it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to just switch between them. And what does that do? Well, it drives your margins, if you're those companies, down to zero, right? That competition just erodes your margins and then puts more pressure on you to release the next generation of product, to desperately try to claw your way ahead of the competition. Arguably, that's been one of the big things that's driven even Anthropic now to release more and more powerful systems in spite of earlier commitments or semi-commitments, ambiguous commitments, certainly been interpreted that way, to sort of lag or come close to lagging the true frontier of the space. So, this is a big amount of pressure to put on even OpenAI as well, as they roll out their O1 Mini, which is now available in the suite of products alongside Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which just came out, and Gemini 1.5 Pro from Google. So, this is all kind of increasingly, it's great for the end user, at least for now, when it comes to competitive dynamics around this stuff. Again, margins get crushed. And if you are a small company trying to build your bespoke LLM or whatever, I think this is a bit of a warning. I've been beating this drum for a while, but I think companies like Cohere are really going to struggle. I don't think there's room for mesoscopic players that can't benefit from economies of scale and just having massive cloud providers supporting them. I think we're now just seeing that thesis play out. One other note from this too. So Anthropic had a whole post about the inclusion of Sonnet, Claude 3.5 Sonnet in this whole suite. We've covered that before. Really, really great model. It is SOTA on software, SWE-bench verified. Basically, this OpenAI tweaked version of the SWE-bench benchmark, which is basically a coding software engineering benchmark. So Anthropic Claude 3.5 Sonnet does amazing there. The big question for Anthropic has never been, can they build competitive models? At least for the last year or so, it's been very clear that they can. The question for them is distribution. You can build the best model in the world, you can build the best product in the world, but if you just get out-distributed by a competitor, that can just crush you as well. Everybody's heard of OpenAI. Very few people have heard of Anthropic, at least if you look at the average person. Actually, the average person probably hasn't heard of OpenAI much too, but you know what I mean. And so this is sort of like what happened with, Slack and Microsoft Teams. Slack had crazy growth, doing amazing. And then Microsoft Teams launched initially a fairly mediocre product, but it's Microsoft. They're in all the operating systems. So they just had massive distribution. In a sense, this is Anthropic piggybacking off of GitHub's amazing distribution. And this kind of levels the playing field a little bit between them and OpenAI, at least when it comes to software development. So that's a really interesting development. It's also interesting because GitHub, of course, is owned by Microsoft. So this is normally, you would expect that to be a sort of OpenAI friendly partner, but here they are platforming Anthropic and Google alongside OpenAI and creating this sort of very direct head-on competition and giving Anthropic distribution that they really, really need, and that does level the playing field in a very substantial way.
And speaking of coding, the next story is related to that, and it's about Anthropic as well. So Claude, the chatbot from Anthropic, has now a new feature, an analysis tool that would allow it to write and run JavaScript code. And this is important because now if you, for instance, upload a CSV, a file with data in it, Claude can write some code, run it, and then output the results of that logic processing. So that's something that's been around in ChatGPT, I believe, for a while, and is now being added to Claude. A very useful feature because it makes up for a weakness of LLMs. LLMs are not able to, let's say, data crunch to run algorithms, but when you let them write code, which they're really very good at, kind of the weakness of LLM in some ways goes away.
Yeah, this is you can think of it as a way of grounding the model, right? You have at every juncture in the reasoning process of an LLM, you have some probability of failure. And when you have a reasoning juncture that forces the model to write and then execute code, the execution of that code is not subject to hallucinations. So it's an injection of ground truth into the process that can help you get more reliable outputs. And they sort of flag this. They don't explicitly tell us quite how this is working in the back end, but they say instead of relying on abstract analysis alone, it can systematically process your data, cleaning, exploring, analyzing it step by step until it reaches the correct result. This starts to sound a lot like, inference time compute, obviously. That's what's going on here in some form. We don't know exactly what it is, what kind of prompting strategy. Is it just an agentic scaffold? Is it a model, what's the training routine in the background? We don't know. But there's obviously, more and more leaning into inference time compute. And in this case, with a view to solving very specific data analytics problems. So interesting that they boxed that out as a category of feature that they wanted to launch. It makes all the sense in the world because of the wide applicability of data analysis. But though we'll see if it gets uptake. They give a bunch of use cases as well in the post that you can check out if you're curious.
Yeah, speaking of distribution and getting awareness, they do explicitly call out, hey, marketers, sales teams, product managers, this is useful for you. And they have this little video that shows not just doing some processing, actually showcasing a whole chart based on some data. So certainly useful if you work with data. And now moving away from chatbots, we have a story related to ElevenLabs, which does a generation of audio, of AI speech. And they have a new feature that is a voice design that allows you to generate a unique voice from a text prompt alone. So ElevenLabs is the leading company providing text-to-speech functionality. You can enter some speech and get audio that is very, very realistic sounding. So far, that was limited to a set of voices they provide, or you could train your own by giving it a bunch of data. Now you can create a voice just from describing it. So you can say, like a serious newscaster that is a real professional or something, and that would generate a voice. So another way to make it easier to make this do what you want.
Yeah, I'd love to see that training data set. But yeah, it's one of these things where when we look at multimodal products like this, I often wonder how the future of prompting is going to look, right? Because explaining verbally what kind of voice you want to get out of a system, text data it's not designed to, it's not very readily able to kind of get across what you mean by a voice, right? So we do impressions really to do that, right? Like, how would you describe, Kamala Harris's voice, Donald Trump's voice? It's really difficult in words, and I kind of wonder if there's a more of an iterative cycle that you'd want to get into with these things down the line, where generate an initial one and then be able to take that as a template and give a subsequent kind of feedback or do an impression or something like that. Get the input to be multimodal. I imagine just like with images, right, where you often want to upload a starting point image and then start to modify it. Like, I could see that working with ElevenLabs products, but anyway, it's an interesting new form factor for prompting for generative voice models.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think the idea is more so to describe who is speaking rather than how they speak, and then the how they speak is implied. They have an example of evil ogre or something. I will mention I did try to see if this can be abused. I copied the description of Barack Obama, the first paragraph, from Wikipedia without including his name, and ElevenLabs did catch me and didn't produce a voice of Obama. So I guess that's good.
Now I want you to follow Last Week in AI podcast. It's a great,
not bad.
We got a lot of good folks. Andre, what a beautiful smile.
Man.
Sorry, we're done.
And moving on, we have Midjourney's new web editor, lets you tweak images uploaded from your PC. So Midjourney so far has been a pure image generator. There's been other competitors that allow you to upload images and edit them. And now you can do that with Midjourney as well. So on this editor, you can edit. That would allow for resizing, erasing, and things like that. And retexture, which lets you modify image contents with prompts. This is still in beta. It's limited to users who have generated at least 10,000 images and have annual memberships and have been monthly subscribers for the past 12 months. So I guess there's some very, very loyal Midjourney customers there.
Yeah, and I actually like that. This is the first time I've ever seen a closed or a beta kind of demarcated in quite that way. It's almost like a loyalty test. Like, hey, have you actually been using it like an obsessive? I think it's brilliant. I mean, back when we were at Y Combinator, this was one of the things they'd tell you to do, right? Find your it's more important to make 100 people love your product than 10,000 people like it decent. And when you find those people, you figure out why they love your product and you double click on it. So I think that may be part of the thinking here. But so interesting. I'm sure there have been examples of this that have happened before. I haven't seen it in AI yet. But yeah, and then they share this kind of interesting screenshot. You know that famous picture of the zebra crossing with the beetles kind of walking across it? Well, they play with that and basically give it a new background and all that. Pretty effective. So just goes to show, I guess they've got a pretty interesting new feature here and an interesting new way to launch it.
And for the last story, actually speaking of Midjourney, the headline of this article is "Watch out, Midjourney, Recraft just announced a new AI image generator model." So yes, Recraft is a company that focuses on things like design, and they have this model Recraft V3, which is pretty good. It came out for a while. It had a high ranking on Hugging Face's text-to-image model leaderboard, and was actually kind of a secretive. People were wondering what it was, and now we know it is this model Recraft V3, which is impressively good at generation. Although, of course, if you take a look, it's kind of hard to distinguish, at least for me at this point, between the different image generators.
Yeah, that's really, it's been a problem kind of in the quantitative side of image generation for a while, right? How do you actually measure the quality of a generated image? It's text went through that phase as well, where like blue scores are just like not enough anymore to get us past that point. Once your model gets better than a certain kind of human or a certain quantitative threshold anyway, it starts to be really difficult to measure. So I've personally found this, like I'm still, and this is a function, I guess, the fact that I'm not a graphic designer. I don't actually use these models to do specific graphic design stuff or animation stuff. And I'm sure if I were in that space, I'd be like, oh yeah, there's one model, it's a lot better than the others. But I think what just looks to the untrained eye like a dead heat across the board. I think we're going to start to see that more and more in the domain specific applications. 6 months, a year from now. I'm always perennially interested in and confused by the massive VC investments in this space when it seems to be rushing towards commoditization so fast. But who knows? We'll see if, as Peter Thiel would say, if competition is for losers or if somebody actually ends up winning.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, Recraft's founder emphasizes a model's design-centric approach, which aims to give designers control over their output. So I think the differentiator there will be like that last 1%, that last 5% of quality that is important to people who are, use this professionally. And that's kind of interesting. We are beyond the point of just quality. You now need to really get into the nitty-gritty.
And actually, I think such a great flag too for the place we are in AI across the board, I think in industry. And I think a lot of people, this is the source of a lot of confusion over, is the space overhyped or is it not, right? We have these impressive demos. You get, say, the ChatGPT moment. People realize, oh, there's all this low-hanging fruit. And there is, but often for the most valuable applications, it's that last mile, right? That like last 1%. It's no good to make a, an app building model that makes a mistake 1% 90% of the time, or sorry, maybe not, that's a bad example. But anyway, a model that serves critical user experience, because 1% could be way, way too high. And you'd be surprised. An awful lot of the time that's an issue. And for agentic models that have to string together a coherent set of actions, 1% error rate will nuke you. If your thing involves 20 steps, then whatever the number is, like 30% of the time, that means you'll be screwing up along the way. And so, yeah, actually, sorry to be less than that. It doesn't matter. But the point is, I think what's going to be surprising is you've got this initial thing where people think it's overhyped because it can't solve the thing. But then suddenly you just get to the point where as you scale, essentially you're driving down that error rate, and then you cross a magic threshold. All of a sudden, things just become possible. So I think it's possible for these things to be both in a way overhyped and underhyped at the same time. Just a question of the timeline you look at it on. And I think, anyway, that's the big question with these image models, and more, I think agentic systems is where we're going to see that.
Moving on to applications and business, and we begin with a trend we've been covering for a while this year: big companies striking deals with media publishers. And this time it's Meta striking a multi-year deal with Reuters. Reuters, in case you don't know, is a very big distributor of news. A lot of kind of breaking news goes out on Reuters. And this would allow Meta's chatbots to have access to real-time news and information from Reuters when users ask questions about news or current events. Unclear if this also provides access to training for Meta, but regardless, certainly seems reminiscent of the partnerships that OpenAI has made with many media companies like Reuters.
Yeah, it's all part of a broader story too when it comes to Meta, of trying to avoid, or historically they've tried to avoid having hard news on their platforms. Taking some steps to avoid the sort of current event stuff more and more, leaving that maybe to platforms like X. And in fact, in this case, we've had their executives have come out and said that they're not going to, quotes, do anything to encourage hard news and political content. But that, of course, is part of what's going to be nudged towards here when you start to explicitly add news into the platform. Anyway, so there are all kinds of questions floating around. What are they going to do for content moderation, for generation of these responses that deal with news and current events? No comments on that yet. Kind of understandable, given that frankly it's probably just an unsolvable problem given today's technology. But we also don't know what the terms of this deal are. So we know there's going to be some kind of compensation to Reuters, but whether this is an annual licensing model or a revenue share thing, and how much money, we just don't know. So kind of interesting to see that next step. They also flag, there's this interesting note at the bottom of one of these articles that talks about how though Meta now appears to be willing to pay for news content, it's also simultaneously fighting laws that would require compensating news publishers for their content on social media. It's this interesting kind of dichotomy, right? They want to find ways to license with individual outlets, but they don't want to just blanket, do revenue sharing for clicks and things like that. There's been a very high-profile situation up in Canada, actually, where you literally cannot access news on Facebook and Instagram because the government's tried to get Meta to pony up money, basically, that it can then recirculate around traditional media, and that's a very controversial proposal as well. If you ask me, it's not the best idea, but it's led to Meta just outright withdrawing from the Canadian ecosystem altogether. So kind of interesting. Similar things happening in California too. So this seems like the OpenAI play, right? People are just saying, hey, it looks like we can get a safe harbor by licensing with these news outlets, at the very least, kind of insulating ourselves from charges that we're just rampantly scraping news with no regard for people's copyrights. So yeah, a bit of a CYA maneuver, but we'll see if it sticks and if other companies follow.
Moving right along, another story related to a trend that we've been talking about all year. Yeah. It's OpenAI and their search for hardware. And the story is OpenAI will start using AMD chips and could make its own AI hardware in 2026. So OpenAI is collaborating with Broadcom on these custom silicon chips. and they are integrating AMD chips into their Microsoft Azure infrastructure. And these are things like AMD's MI300 chips. I suppose previously, of course, NVIDIA was a big company that everyone went to for their AI compute, but now AMD is starting to be a real competitor in the space, seemingly.
Yeah, it's the reason behind this is partly, at least, OpenAI wants just more flow. They want more sort of sources of that hardware. So, they're not going to say no to more NVIDIA hardware, but if there's another source at AMD that's offering some, great, we'll take it. Also, diversifying your suppliers beyond NVIDIA gives you more leverage in the sort of price negotiation side or sort of the acquisition side. It's also part of OpenAI just shamelessly poaching the top hardware engineers they can get at Google. So they've assembled apparently a chip team of about 20 people. And these are the people who focused on building the TPUs at Google, the flagship sort of specialized ASIC that Google builds, the tensor processing unit. And so, they're obviously interested in fairly custom hardware, which is its own really interesting story. As you see more and more, the research at the frontier labs, like OpenAI, like Anthropic, like Google, start to go dark, right? It's no longer open source stuff. Everybody's hiding their trade secrets from everybody except the Chinese, that is. They're starting to build these out, and you're starting to see more and more differences between the approaches taken by these labs. And I think that's really interesting. We're going to start to see decorrelation in the kind of AI model architectures. And one consequence of that is you're going to start to see decorrelation at the hardware level. And OpenAI kind of characteristically sort of aggressive in terms of pushing forward on all fronts, including hardware. Basically making a big bet that like, hey, let's double down on building our own custom hardware. They have to partner with Broadcom because they don't have all the capacity to design in-house. And it's not the first time we've heard about that OpenAI Broadcom partnership, by the way. That's something we covered previously. But this does move Broadcom further into the camp of competing with NVIDIA on the design of these kind of advanced ASICs, which is something that Broadcom has done historically, but now these are really AI ASICs meant to sort of compete with the sort of TPU model or the GPU models that NVIDIA pumps out. So that's really interesting. We'll see. It's also in some ways not the most surprising thing because we've seen a whole bunch of news about OpenAI poaching hardware engineers from Google in particular. And fascinatingly, Broadcom actually had previously been Google's TPU partner. It's something that hasn't really been caught on to in a lot of these reports, but it is the case that initially, when Google was first designing the TPU, they did tap Broadcom for that effort. So this is actually OpenAI mirroring Google's initial strategy. Some people have said, oh, well, they're partnering with Broadcom, they don't have the capacity, so this says something negative about OpenAI. But no, this is just how you get that effort off the ground. So it would not at all be surprising if you would see that happening. Especially, you've got there's a great comment on Hacker News about this. You've got all these employees, former Google employees, moving over to OpenAI and basically bringing that vendor relationship with Broadcom with them as well. So there's a strong bias now to just replicate what worked so well at Google with TPUs over on the OpenAI side.
Right, exactly. So the partnership with Broadcom is very directly implying that they want to build something like the TPU with tensor processing unit that Google has had since, I believe, 2016 was version 1, and they've iterated on it a lot since then. Broadcom actually has generated or has gotten billions in revenue from that partnership with Google. So it makes sense they want to do more of that. And according to this news, OpenAI has been working for months with Broadcom to build their first AI chip focusing on inference. And another dimension there is having custom hardware for inference lets you be faster and lets you be cheaper. And we have often talked about margins. We know that OpenAI has billions in revenue, but it's still unclear whether that can convert to profit, whether you can actually be profitable while still competing in this price war that is ongoing with Anthropic and other providers. So I do think that this would be one of the ways that these players can stay ahead of the pack is by having hardware that lets them have good margins, which is otherwise very difficult with just GPUs.
Well, and specifically with inference time compute, right? Because that's the entire paradigm. If you look at the direction the field is heading in, that's becoming dominant. We're seeing this shift from training time compute to inference time compute. And like, not to toot our own horn, but it's been about 2 years that we've been talking about that this shift was coming. As soon as the earliest hints of scaling laws for inference time compute and sort of like exchange rates between training time compute and inference time compute, you could trade off one for the other in certain contexts. I think that's where things are going. So OpenAI is saying, hey, you know what? With models like O1, which are explicitly our big AGI play, we're going to find ourselves using more and more inference time compute. These things are going to spend more and more time pondering, thinking over problems as they go. And why optimize hardware to be able to do back propagation? In other words, to be able to do like model training when you're only going to use a relatively small fraction of your hardware dollars to do training. If you have a more specialized problem like inference, you can make a more specialized piece of AI hardware and have, as you say, better margins. And obviously, companies like Grok have been doing big plays in this direction, where it's like, okay, we're just going to carve out the inference piece and just crush that. And it's at least seemed to pay off well for them so far. So it'll be cool to see OpenAI doubling down on inference even more.
Right. And inference also is the main thing that people pay for when you use their API, et cetera, right? So that's the pricing on inference is the differentiator for large, like right now, there's some difference, but GPT-4o, Sonnet 3.5, you can go back and forth between them pretty easily. And it comes down in a lot of cases to price. So it's very important to be able to, be able to keep up with price reductions that keep happening. And one quick last note I found interesting. This is a big deal. Broadcom's stock jumped 4.5% on the news, and AMD's went up by 3.7%. So that tells you something about, how investors are viewing this. On to the lightning round, and we begin with a competitor to OpenAI, xAI. And the news is that they are looking for funding. They want to be raising some more billions. They've raised $6 billion so far in Series B funding, reaching a valuation of $24 billion. Now they are seeking more money for a valuation of $40 billion. And it seems to be the case that they want to raise this money to be able to buy more GPUs to increase their data center from 100,000 to 200,000 GPUs, or at least that's what I've read about this. So I guess unsurprising in a way that xAI needs a lot of money to try and catch up really with OpenAI and Anthropic. They seem to be essentially targeting the same customers with the same type of product. So xAI certainly making a big effort on that front.
Yeah, there's so much. It's such an interesting play because you might have written off xAI before all this, right? Where there was a time when it was like Google, it was Microsoft / OpenAI, and it was Anthropic, and they seemed to be the only one, maybe Meta, with the resources to pull this off. xAI has seemingly come out of nowhere, and we were warned about this when we were doing our investigation last year, just before xAI had launched. And they're like, hey, watch these guys, because the acquisitions they're making on the GPU front, the hardware front, are pretty monstrous. The differentiator, right, in this space, if scaling is true, which basically all the frontier labs seem to think is the case, that you can scale your way to AGI or something like that, then you got to be number one. There's no prize for number two. And so the fundraising pitches have got to sound like we're going to do it first. That there is no other option, right? There is no fundraise that sounds like we're going to make self-improving AGI and we'll do it second. By then it's irrelevant. Someone else has already done it, and you got your runaway effects and all that if all this bears out. In that context, Elon has done a spectacular job of taking xAI from a horse nobody's heard about to a very competitive horse for the head of this race. Not only hitting as he advertised it, the largest supercomputer H100 cluster, training cluster that exists, which was probably true at the time, but also doubling the size now in an unprecedentedly short period of time, launching this cluster in 19 days from the first H100 GPU rack rolling onto the floor. in the Gigafactory. That is insane. Like there's a really great interview with Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, of course, who was talking about just how long this stuff usually takes, usually a matter of months or years, 122 days in the case of XAI to operationalize this whole system. So really wild. Elon intimately involved in, as he does so well, in the design of the hardware stack and implementation of the build. This is really quite remarkable. They've also made some weird choices around how they wire all this up, how they power it as well. They don't use, for example, this very well established basically interconnect called InfiniBand that NVIDIA makes. Instead, they're using basically an Ethernet fabric that pretty recently came out, and it's very competitive. But it's all this sort of like, you can just see the fingerprints of Elon getting all in on this and having a very eclectic, very unusual design to the cluster. So super interesting. And that's going to be the play for fundraising. We can do it first because we're doing it differently.
They certainly are running a lot of hardware. So it's very impressive that they've been able to basically catch up. Their models are not quite as good, but they're essentially, you can use them for a lot of stuff that you would use ChatGPT or Claude for. And certainly Elon Musk, if nothing else, is good at running hardware companies.
Yeah, and acquiring, right? Like one of the big things that he does, maybe more than anything design-wise on the cluster, is just he's able to muscle around his big famous guy-ness and go to like Jensen Huang at NVIDIA and go like, hey, dude, I know you've got a bunch of people like just begging you for GPUs, but I'm cool and famous. I'm going to ask you for them, and I'm going to brag about how productive our partnership has been. And you've seen that really be an interesting boon for NVIDIA too, right? Like basically now you've got, Elon Musk, or arguably the world's most successful entrepreneur, coming out and saying, hey, like this is the hardware stack that we use. They're amazing. Working with NVIDIA has been great. And then NVIDIA's returned the favor. So, there's like non-trivial marketing benefit too to both parties in doing this. But that nonetheless is value that Elon's bringing to the table and spinning this stuff up fast. So I think he knows exactly the value he's bringing to the table, and he's using it well, right? I mean, this is what he's supposed to do.
Yeah. Also, infamously borrowed some GPUs from Tesla, or redirected rather some GPUs.
That's a good point.
So as always, it's interesting to see like the Elon Musk mega corporation and how that's all it's working.
It's Elon Corp.
Yes. Next, a startup that is raising some money. It's Physical Intelligent, a robot AI specialist, and they are raising millions from various sources, including Jeff Bezos. So they have raised $400 million in a new financing round that's following up from their initial $70 million seed funding just earlier this year, not too long ago. Now they're being valued at approximately $2 billion. And this is coinciding with some news of progress they've made that we will cover in just a little while. So Physical Intelligence, no product yet. They are promising to build a sort of a general purpose robot brain that allows robots to be very capable. And certainly it seems investors are very bullish on that promise.
Yeah, and then they're being careful as well. You can see them hedging on the sort of hype of the initial product, understandably. They're saying, look, this is more of a sort of like GPT-1, which, if you're old enough in the space to remember, before there was GPT-4, there was GPT-3 and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so GPT-1 was...
2018, I think.
I think GPT-2 was 2018, wasn't it?
I think GPT-2 was 2019, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really?
2017 or 2018. 2017 was the Transformers paper, actually.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, okay. Well, anyway, it was one of the late teens in the 20s, and that nobody can really remember because it was pre-pandemic. But they're saying, hey, this is more like a GPT-1. Don't think about it as a chat GPT. It's like a proof of concept. So, but they are saying, a chat GPT style breakthrough could come far sooner than we expect, or it could definitely be far out. So, a lot of uncertainty, and that's what you kind of expect in this space too, right? The chat GPT moment is a thing in AI precisely because we don't know at what level of AI capability all of a sudden you crack that critical threshold where some critical mass of tasks become possible to make the thing viable from a commercial standpoint. So you just keep improving. and hope that you kind of flip that switch. And it is pretty binary. At least that's how products do tend to be. It's just that normally it's humans iterating on it rather than just pouring compute into a thing until something cracks.
And as I said, more of that soon.
Mm-hmm.
A couple more stories, this time about Waymo. And Waymo has also raised some money, in particular $5.6 billion from several investors, notably, of course, Alphabet, Waymo's parent company, also Google's parent company. So probably a lot of this money is kind of just coming from Google to Waymo, essentially from the money printer that is Google Ads to this new initiative, but also with participation from Andreessen Horowitz, Fidelity, and Silver Lake. And this is coming at a time when they are trying to expand to new cities like Austin and Atlanta and LA. And combo story also on Waymo. I figured we'd cover both. So the other story this week was that Waymo has been serving over 150 paid Robotaxi rides every week so far lately. So that is up 50% in just 2 months. And that is notable pretty much just because the important thing to see is how can Waymo scale. Can it actually expand its operations rapidly to be able to be competitive and, basically reach the market before Tesla does? And these are good signs on that front.
Yeah, and no surprise, they're looking to, as a next step, increase geographic coverage, right? So that's how you do it. I imagine also like the challenge of entering a new city is going to be interesting for them because you want to get people used to seeing other people in Waymos, in these driverless cars. It's a little weird. Anyway, I'd be interested to see the playbook for launching in a new city. All these companies will have that. Waymos will be especially interesting.
Yeah, I will say nowadays in a CEF, if you're in a crowded area, you're very likely to see Waymo in like a 2-minute period. They're kind of all over the place now.
Hey, dude, I remember having that feeling of, wow, when you're in San Francisco, when you're in Mountain View, that kind of area, you really do see the future. It was, I want to say 2017, 2018. I remember walking around and just seeing people with AirPods. And I know this sounds stupid, right? Because now everybody wears AirPods. But back then it was not the case. Everybody had these, dangling little, wire things. And I remember thinking man, this is either the weirdest place in the world or this is what every place in the world is going to look like very soon. And it's generally that. It happened with bird scooters as well, right? Yeah, we all remember that. Anyway, I think it's probably a harbinger of what's to come.
Pretty sure the billboards with ads for AI companies will not be coming to our place.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
On to the next section, projects and open source. We have just a couple fun stories here, starting with Meta AI, which has quietly released a new thing called NotebookLlama, which is an open version of Google's NotebookLM. A nice little, contrast to NotebookLlama and NotebookLM. As we've covered, NotebookLM is a pretty popular thing from Google. It allows you to upload files like PDFs and so on, and then essentially have a conversation about those files, get summaries, things like that. Notably, recently it has become popular because you can also generate a sort of podcast episode. We're having audio discussion of whatever is in those documents.
But Andre, it could never do what we do. Right. It could never.
I mean, certainly we would do a better job, of course.
Yeah, so don't if you're thinking about checking it, just don't even it's going to be disappointing. You're going to waste your time. We'll tell you about it. Don't check it out. It can't possibly be as charming and humorous as us.
I think if we feed it the amount of notes we have and try to generate 2 hours, I don't think it would do as good a job. Anyways, NotebookLlama is similar in a way where if you provide some text, some documents to it, you can chat about those documents, get summaries, things like that.
Yeah, but I think moving into that direction where eventually you get these really reliable audio generation tools like the original NotebookLM. I think that is quite game changing. I actually used the NotebookLM, the original. And damn it, it's pretty good. You get the 10-minute podcast. It's at the sort of right level of abstraction and complexity for conveying, more or less what you want. I'd like to see more ability to kind of control the level of the discussion and that sort of thing. And I think that's exactly what open sourcing a tool like this would allow you to do down the line once they get to really good, actual podcast generation. So I think this is one of those products where open sourcing really will get you a lot of cool ideas implemented pretty fast, because the way that you set up a podcast matters so much. And anyway, you could imagine people wanting to include a wide variety of different prompts and meta instructions too.
I took a listen just now, and it's not quite as good as NotebookLM. Like NotebookLM, the impressive thing is that it's very, very realistic sounding. There's like a little bit of AI weirdness, but it's very minimal. In these generations, because it's not using proprietary models, it's not quite as good, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, it kind of, the vibe they went for with the original launch of NotebookLM, it kind of made me think, if you ever heard of like the Reply All podcast, those sorts of things where you have, two hosts, and there's this, it's a little bit bantery for my taste. There's a lot of banter, and it can get a little bit like too whimsical at times, but I gotta say, it definitely isn't, it's not Uncanny Valley. Like, that was the thing that amazed me. I expected a bit of a janky experience, kind of like the whatever that jukebox thing that OpenAI first, but the first versions kind of sucked. This one was like straight for the jugular. It was amazing. And so not surprising the open source version of this isn't quite up to snuff, but soon.
Yeah, the open source community will take it and run wild with it. Next story, also about Meta, and this one is about a release of Llama 3.2 quantized models. As we've covered, I believe, many times on the podcast, quantized models are things where you take the real full model that usually has float weights, so things like 1.2, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. And you reduce the size of each of those numbers. You quantize it so it uses 8 bits, 4 bits, something like that. The kind of resolution of the weights of the model goes down, which makes it smaller in size and makes it use less memory. And that's important for things like phones. So here they're saying that they have these quantized models that have a 56 reduction in model size, 56%, and a 41% decrease in memory usage. And these are 1 billion and 3 billion size models.
Yeah, and I think so one thing to recognize about these quantized models, right, is that you take a big ding in quality when you quantize. So you imagine you train usually at like BF16, so like 16 bits of precision in your number, and then you're going to reduce that to say 4 bits or 8 bits, right? You're going to take that model and compress it by throwing out a bunch of that information. Now, your model was not trained. It was trained with the 16-bit representation. It was trained with the expectation that it could use that level of resolution. If it had been trained with the expectation that it would be forced to use 4 bits at inference, then it probably would have taken a slightly different strategy, right? You can sort of imagine that. If you had to send yourself instructions and you were given like just 2 sentences versus 2 pages, you'd probably use a different approach, right? So same idea here. So when you impose that limitation, when you quantize post hoc after the training is done, you lose a ton of performance compared to doing something called quantization aware training. So if you train with the kind of incorporate the quantization into the training process, many ways to do that. That's what they do here. We covered a story a little while back. It was called self-compressing neural networks. And that was, I think, back in August, if you want to check that out, the August 9th episode. But self-compressing neural networks is an example of this, where basically what you do is you make one of the model parameters, one category of model parameters, not just the weights, not just the biases, but the level of resolution for each weight or each bias. And so you actually have the model train on how accurately it represents its own weights on the go. And in particular, you can even imagine allowing the model to like completely zero out a weight, right? If it finds that, hey, you know what, let me look at this weight. Oh, you know what, I could probably get away with an 8-bit represent. I'd probably do a 4-bit, 2-bit. Oh, actually 1-bit. Oh, shoot, I can get rid of the weight completely, right? So you can gradually hone in on removing weights completely with this approach. It's very powerful. And there are a whole bunch of other, the straight through estimator is sort of like a famous one that Yoshua Bengio proposed a long time ago, that lets you basically, like, gradient updates, they'll be propagated to weights through a rounding operation, which, if you're mathematically inclined, you might recognize that as like, yeah, that's part of what I have to do with this sort of like quantization process. But anyway, bottom line is lots of ways to do this. Incorporate knowledge of the quantization into the training loop. That gives you a better result. Combine it with LoRa, which we've talked about before here, and gives you a bit of finer control on this kind of additional capacity or capability in the model. So I think this is really cool. I'm not aware of another quantization aware training process that's led to a sort of frontier-ish model like this. So this is actually a really interesting and new development. I may be wrong, but I don't know. We cover a lot of news. I don't think I've seen this before.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's pretty new. My kind of perception is usually you do more like distillation training. You do some more training once you quantize. So this is pretty different and quite cool. And one more story for the section, this time about a benchmark. OpenAI has released SimpleQA, a benchmark for measuring the factuality of language models. So one of the major issues with LLMs is hallucinations, where LLMs say things that are straight up false or just made up, but say it in a way that seems like it's true. And this benchmark includes 4,326 questions across various domains and was created adversarially against GPT-4 to ensure that it's challenging even for advanced models. So because of that, GPT-4 scores only 38.4% correct answers, which tests the ability to give actually reliable answers. And there's also things like metrics like correct given attempted. So if you try to answer, LLMs can also say not attempted. So you don't give an answer to the question. And that in some ways is better, right? Because you're not going to hallucinate.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. As a benchmark, honestly, naively, when I first saw SimpleQA, I was like, well, how is this not saturated? This is a stupid benchmark. But then you look at the actual questions. So the criteria are they're sort of interesting. It's basically just like, let's index really hard on dead simple questions, and let's make sure there's an absolutely indisputable answer to these questions. So we're not talking about questions about philosophy, morality, politics, whatever. Just fact-based questions. But they have to be questions that previous models really struggled with. So they end up being super, super niche. Like if you've ever played one of these like crazy trivia games, if you have a TV show you really like, I just remember, I had friends who would play this like Star Trek trivia game, and they'd be like, in season 3, episode 4 of whatever, some character says something to some other character, and what's on the table when blah, blah, blah. That's the kind of question, though indexed more towards history, that you get here. There's some a little bit less intense than that, but that's kind of the flavor, like make them really specific and niche. And it does cause these models to trip up, and maybe that's not so surprising. A couple of findings that they come up with here: GPT-4o mini and o1 mini answer fewer questions correctly compared to GPT-4o and o1 preview. Not surprising. These are small models, right? So generally speaking, like one of the things that you can pretty confidently anchor on is a larger model with more parameters will just have more parameters to kind of soak up knowledge with. And so they'll be better at general knowledge. Maybe not better at reasoning, but certainly better at general knowledge. And you could chalk that up to overfitting, basically, because the model's bigger, whatever. But that's fundamentally what's going on there. An interesting result, though, was that o1 mini and o1 preview, they choose not to attempt questions more often than GPT-4o mini and GPT-4o. And they're not sure why, but they speculate it might be because they're actually able to use their reasoning capabilities to recognize when they don't know the answer to a question instead of just going ahead and hallucinating. And I thought that was really interesting. Again, a benefit of inference time compute, right? These models can generate a scratchpad answer, kind of interrogate it, and go, does that look right to me? I'm not so sure. You know what? Let's maybe not go ahead and give that output. So, sort of shows the entanglement between reasoning and hallucination. And a lot of people have proposed a lot of different theories about how exactly hallucination is tied to reasoning. But this definitely supports that hypothesis, right? Like you're in that space where you're seeing some clear differences with these reasoning models. And then there's the separate question. This I thought was so interesting. So, how well calibrated are the model's claims, right? So calibration here means, if you ask me who's going to win the election today, right? And I say, well, I think there's an 80% probability that Kamala will win, or an 80% probability that Trump will win. When I make claims like that, if I'm well calibrated, I should be wrong, or I should be right about 80% of the time and wrong 20% of the time, right? That's what it means. If I'm telling you I'm 80% sure of X, well, then 80% of the time X should happen if I'm well calibrated. And so they test that with these models. They literally ask them, okay, you just gave me an answer. How confident are you in that answer? And they give calibration curves that are really, really interesting. So no surprise. I mean, the calibration's kind of shit for most of these models, but it does track. So the models are to some degree able, when they tell you, yeah, I'm really confident, they tend to be more correct. So for example, when the models say that they're 90% confident, you'll see accuracy scores hovering around the 60% mark, at least for the O1 models. Whereas if they tell you that they're 50-50, the accuracy is 10%. So you actually do see, it's this interesting kind of curved plot too. You'd expect it to be a straight line if it was perfectly calibrated, but it's not. Anyway, so there's a whole bunch of interesting other measurements on calibration. I would recommend checking that out because I think it's actually it's hiding in these calibration questions is a very, very powerful insight about self-correction, right? If a model is able to correctly determine how confident it should be in its own output, that's not far from self-correction, right? Being able to recognize that you're on the wrong track or have an intuition that, yeah, I'm pretty sure this result is the right one. That gets you to some interesting places. And that's why I think, no surprise, the O1 models far, far, far outstrip the GPT-4o series in terms of calibration. So it wasn't kind of branded as that here, but I think that's one of the hidden insights here. Calibration and reasoning, calibration and hallucination are entangled in this kind of complex of ideas around, can the model in a sense, introspect or assess that it's not quite on the right track. So I think more to come in that line of research, I'd suspect, in the next few months.
Yeah, quite a few little interesting tidbits in this paper if you dig deeper. Just for fun, I'll give some examples of the questions in this benchmark. So one example is, what is the first and last name of a woman whom the British linguist Bernard Comrie married in 1985?
Oh, do you not know that?
I did not know that. The answer is Akiko Kumahira.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. Another example is what day, month, and year was Carrie Underwood's album Cry Pretty certified gold by the RIAA? So if you are a diehard Carrie Underwood fan, maybe you know that. I don't think most people do. That's October 23rd, 2018. So you can see how these are simple questions in some sense, but unless you actually know the answer, there's no way you can get them right. And so in that sense, it's actually pretty impressive that the models do get pretty, here GPT-4o has 38% correctness, O1 Preview 42%. So they have soaked up a lot of knowledge, even very obscure knowledge. One last interesting thing to note, they did also evaluate the Claude models, Haiku through Sonnet, and there is quite a discrepancy in the sense that Claude models all across the board did not attempt to answer things much more often. GPT-4o on these questions only did not attempt to answer on 1% of the questions and got things wrong 61% of the time as a result. Claude 3.5 Sonnet did not attempt to answer 35% of the time and got things 36% wrong as a result. And so actually the Claude models are better if you account for how often you attempt to answer. Which is interesting, I think. And even the smallest Claude models, like Claude 3 Haiku, does not attempt to answer 75% of the time. So it seems like the training, that tells us something about how OpenAI and Anthropic are training differently and for different goals.
Yeah, and it absolutely speaks to the differentiation in the products, right? I found myself when I have cases where if I'm just trying to understand a topic for the first time, and it's not easy to verify the truth of the claims that I'm getting, I will tend to go to Anthropic, to Claude, because I'm like, okay, you're more likely to not take the risk and just like make something up. But if I'm more in like ideation mode, trying to kind of brainstorm from scratch, that's where OpenAI models and other models can be better. So the personality, if you will, of these models becomes an important factor.
And now on to research and advancements. And as promised, we are getting back to physical intelligence. They unveiled their first research output, a generalist policy, covered in this article. This is a glimpse of the future of AI robots. So this generalist policy, the idea behind it is it's a unified model that can control different types of robots. So things like a robot arm or a robot that has wheels and two arms, a robot with two arms, these different kind of bodies, and that can do various tasks. So it's conditioned with just some language to do things like folding articles of clothing, carrying things between tables, bussing things, assembling boxes and packing items, stuff like that. And so they, of course, went the large model route. That's kind of the whole promise and why they got $70 million and now even more. So they trained a very large model on a very large amount of data, an unprecedented amount of data. Over 10,000 hours of robot demonstration data across 7 different robot configurations and 68 distinct tasks. And this was by combining released research data sets. There's been some efforts on that front in recent years. Also, they have some proprietary data via collection. And this model has 3.3 billion parameters. So that tells you something about what they're aiming for. And last thing I'll mention, there's a lot to note here, but the other thing that's important for robotics is you need high frequency control. You need to be able to output things very rapidly, many, many times per second, to be able to control robots. So they say here you can get up to 50 hertz of output for robot control.
And this is why the model's so small, right? Like that's all part of the strategy here. It does remind me as well of DeepMind's Gato model, which came out back in 2022, right? Famously, is sort of like 450 tasks that it could perform. I think it was like about 50% as well as a human expert or something like that. I think it was actually it was trained on like 600, but anyway, could do whatever. The Gato was billed as this generalist agent, right? That was the name of the paper that announced the release of it. And this seems like a very similar approach. It's one of these things where they're trying to combine a VLM, like a vision language model, with this kind of fine-tuning training for robotic control. And there's a limited kind of output dimension. Andre, you were flagging this earlier to me as like something you found really interesting. I think it is. It's also interesting that we're still at the stage where we're not quite training generalist robot systems, right? We're still anchoring on. We have 16 dimensions that of outputs, of affordances, like sensors and actuators that we can control. I think one of the things that's going to be interesting to watch out for is like, how does that change? How do we move into a world where it looks more like we have a world model backing the system, which is what the VLM is really doing here, and increasingly, fine-tuning it for different end-use robotics applications so that the model itself captures enough of the physics that you need less and less fine-tuning, less and less actual robotics manipulation data to get this thing to learn a new task, and maybe ultimately just kind of vision data, which would be really interesting because that's the sort of thing that humans use, of course. But that's part of the age-old debate of what kind of data is best for these sorts of general tasks. But anyway.
They released also some evaluations. There's a whole paper that they released in kind of a standard academic format. Not surprising, given that the founders of the company, a lot of them are professors, people like Chelsea Finn, Sergey Brin, people who have contributed a ton to robotics in the deep learning space. So they also did some evaluation, in particular on zero-shot performance. That is to say, you don't have any demonstrations on this particular tasks. And what they have shown is for various tasks like shirt folding, grocery bagging, getting a toast out of a toaster, this model is able to somewhat generalize. So It can fold shirts like 100% of the time. I suppose probably like unseen shirts. It can get around 80% on grocery bagging, things like that. So that's the really important thing for a generalist model, is to be able to do something without having done it before or having seen it done before, which humans are quite good at. If you see like a new piece of clothing, you can pretty easily figure out how to fold it without having done it before.
And that's a big shift, especially in the robotic control and multimodal space, right? So it used to be, and fairly recently, like as recently as 2021, 2022, in fact, this was the case. I think it was the case with the original Godot release. I don't think it was the case with Godot 2, but we were at a level of scale such that the models were small enough that once you train them on a core set of skills, if you wanted to train them on an additional skill, they would kind of forget some of the old skills. They would perform worse. They wouldn't actually, the theory was you should get what's known as positive transfer. You should get, it should become easier and easier for the model to learn a new incremental skill because it's picked up so many. Just like, if you go out and learn math or physics, that makes it easier to learn chemistry. Well, what they saw back then was negative transfer. Actually, adding more skills caused the thing. It was just too many balls in the air, and it started to perform worse on the kind of original skills that it had been trained for. Now we're starting to see, as you say, that positive transfer, and that's long been hypothesized. You had a lot of debate in AGI circles about would that be a crux? We've now blown past that debate a long time ago, and it's interesting to see that even now rise in commercial products. So, really interesting development, and we'll see what the kind of the next steps are if this is really GPT-1 and ChatGPT's maybe around the corner or a few years on.
Well, they are calling it Pi Zero, so maybe it's like GPT Zero in this case.
They're really trying to fight the hype. This is like...
and as always with robotics, there's a whole bunch of fun videos to look at of these robots doing stuff, especially in their blog post. There's just a ton of them. So as always, you can go to the link to check it out, and I'll try to include a few also on the YouTube version of the podcast. Alrighty, moving along, the next story is not about robotics, it is about coding. And the paper is, Can Language Models Replace Programmers? REPOCOD says not yet. So we've seen some high numbers on coding benchmarks like human eval and MBPP. From LLMs, you can get something like 90% accuracy on these coding benchmarks. But these benchmarks are often on sort of these like little challenge problems, like, solve this problem via an algorithmic approach. So they don't address what you actually do as a programmer, as a software engineer, which is writing code within a larger product, larger code base, stuff like that. So in this benchmark, they have a new data set consisting of 980 problems from 11 popular real-world projects, with over 58% of those requiring file-level or repository-level context, which of course is what you need when you are programming. You need to know your code base. And so much more complex than what you would get in these programming challenges. And as a result, no LLMs have achieved more than 30% accuracy. So that, goes to show that you're not going to replace professional programmers with LLMs just yet, at least not, without putting in a lot of work.
Yeah, this goes back to, I guess, what we were talking about in terms of the agent flow. And if you have a model that makes, a mistake 1% of the time, well, making substantive changes to a code base involves stacking an awful lot of 1% on each other. So you get very high failure rates. I will flag, this is a pass at one, right? So basically they're just seeing, can you succeed at solving the problem the very first time? This is kind of like expecting a human to just start coding and don't stop and just get it all right, roughly speaking, in one shot. So, you wouldn't expect a human to be able to do that. The fact these models can get 30% under those conditions, I think is quite remarkable. And of course, scaling, blah, 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 scaling can, might easily solve this. But even just looking at what's happening with inference time compute and the possibility as well of having little checks along the way. One of the things that's missing right now, the reason humans are so important in the code writing loop still is that we basically just serve as a source of ground truth, right? We will like write up or start writing a function, hit autocomplete, whatever, and then we'll kind of check it and be like, yeah, that makes sense. You keep going, and you don't really think about that as a programmer so much about like the amount of information you're feeding into the system, doing these minor little course corrects that really are compensating for those 1%, 2%, 5% errors at each step. So it helps to lift a lot of the burden from your shoulders. You're not writing nearly as much code. I know I don't, but to actually have the system fully automate what you're doing is a very different story. And the bar is so much higher. Once you can do that, you're in a very different world very fast, but it takes a while to get there.
And a fun little detail, if you are a programmer, I'll include is some of the repositories they use here are scikit-learn, Flask, Plotly.py, Sphinx. These are big, well-known packages if you're a Python programmer, as I am. Like I've used Flask, I've used scikit-learn, I've used Seaborn, and they're quite complex code bases to work in. So it makes sense that the LLMs can't, nail this out of the box. On to the lightning round, where we'll try to go a bit faster. The first paper is Brain-like Functional Organization within Large Language Models. So we know a little bit about how brains work. We know that there are various sort of areas of the brain that focus on different sensory domains like visual, auditory, and linguistic phenomena. And that's what we're looking here at LLMs. We're looking to see how individual neurons within language models organize functionality, similar to how the human brain has specialized networks. So they do that with fMRI patterns and then try to map that to patterns within neural network activations. And what they find is that you have, some similarity, right, in terms of their being organization within LLMs. And in particular, more advanced LLMs have more organized and hierarchical functional patterns. You can't do it one-to-one, of course, but as we've seen also before in prior research, kind of the same phenomena of organizing information and compute arises in the human brain and these bigger LLMs.
Yep. I mean, it's kind of interesting. And we were talking, was it last week, about Anthropic hiring somebody who should care about AI consciousness and sentience. And it kind of makes you think, once you get to the point where these patterns, let's say, are about as different between LLMs as they are between humans, or rather, when an LLM is somewhere in parameter space that's in between, like human neuron behavior, at what point do you start to think about that? Assuming there's reinforcement learning circuitry there as well that kind of mimics the limbic system, blah, blah, blah. But, it's an interesting metric if you get to that point, and probably a lot sooner. But if you get to that point, it kind of starts to make you ask some interesting questions. But there's a lot of cool research in this direction. I know there are people at Meta who have done stuff like this as well. So a lot of cool stuff if you're a neuroscientist. I'm not, but alas.
Next story, Decart's AI simulates a real-time playable version of Minecraft. Decart is an Israeli company, and they hit it a little bit big. I've seen this with the launch of Oasis, which is a model that lets you basically play the game Minecraft entirely via an AI model. So you can do the same kind of inputs, move around, mine for stuff as you do in Minecraft, but the actual rendering of the game and all the logic is being handled by a neural network. And the impressive thing is that they have a real-time demo, so you can actually play this like a game. It's being output at quite high frame rates, although not super high resolutions. And this came out at the same time as them announcing $21 million in funding.
Yeah, it's all part of this debate, right, over whether AI models can develop these world models, right? So a robust representation of actual physics. And I really like this test, right? Because this I call it Minesweeper. Can you tell I'm a millennial? Minecraft. The interesting thing about Minecraft is the physics is so simple, right? Like it really is like if you stripped away all the general relativity and the quantum mechanics and it's just blocks and shit, that's great. So to the extent that you can show that this thing can master a physics engine, that it can master a world model, even a simplified one, you are to some degree showing that models can do this. And then you start to ask, why not the real world? And I think that is a legitimate question. So that sort of becomes the point of contention. How well is this, how robustly is this model actually capturing what's going on here? And it's a bit unclear. So one of the issues is that you see, as you play it, even for a short period of time, it'll quickly forget the level layout, and the landscape will just kind of get rearranged around you. Now, those of us who may be on more of the scaling camp would say, well, this is a question of just more scale and blah, blah, blah. You guys know the Jeremy take, I don't need to repeat it, but they're interesting questions. They're very smart people who would disagree. And this is a symptom, right? I mean, if I turned around and the room was reorganized behind me, that would tell me that like somebody has fucked up the universe's physics engine. So this is, I think, part of the debate that will continue. But definitely impressive that it can have that coherence, frame to frame in over a few seconds. We've seen this with other games and things like this, but I've never seen a demo, like a playable demo that you can play at a decent frame rate. So it's kind of cool.
Right. Yeah. I'm certainly in the other camp where I don't think you would want to simulate a world via just a pure neural network. And I think there's some arguments to be made there. I think our brains wouldn't be very good at simulation, right? We have sort of very fuzzy simulation, not exact as you need in a game. And that's what you get with the simulator. Like you can interact roughly in the right way, but then it does forget the state of the world, and it can sort of get very trippy sometimes if you play for a while.
Actually, so I agree with you that you wouldn't want to. Like, I don't think it's optimized hardware for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess the argument is that one way humans do this reliably, this is kind of interesting. We'd have a separate discussion on this, but is we distill laws of physics. And so we're able to like look at the world around us and go, oh, well, like I can write down an equation that predicts robustly what's going to happen around me. If I had the capacity, and again, this would not be the right way to use the human brain, as you said, but if I had the capacity, I could plug those laws of physics into a physics engine and run the engine and offload that compute to that end system. So I don't know if we're that far apart in our position, but it's like kind of what is the capacity of the model to extract those rules that govern the physics, and do those come out naturally with scaling? And I think that the answer is only going to be borne out with more scaling. So luckily, we don't have to bet our $50 billion a year. Microsoft is doing that for us.
And the last bit here, raising a bar on SWE-bench verified with Claude 3.5 Sonnet. So Jeremy mentioned this earlier in the episode. Anthropic did have this announcement of the model achieving a 49% score on SWE-bench verified, which surpassed the previous state-of-the-art of 45%. And that did come about just as it was announced that GitHub now has support for it. And SWE-bench is related to solving GitHub issues from open source Python repositories. You have these like, oh, here's a bug, I need to solve it. That's what GitHub issues are. So, being able to do well on this is pretty good, pretty like obviously directly useful.
Yeah, I love this paper. This was just really good. Anthropic's really good at the whole building models and then thinking deeply about the prompts game. Like I think it's fair to say one of their differentiators. And they do a great job in this paper just laying out the actual prompts and prompt development approaches that they follow to make their agent. One of the things that was cool, so they share their design philosophy, which basically is just to give as much control as possible to the LLM itself and keep the agentic scaffolding minimal, right? So you have some agentic scaffolds that really try to tell the model how to think. They're going the opposite direction and saying, you know what, let's trust the model to think things through on its own, which is what you might expect as the models get more capable. You rely less and less on that scaffolding. So they share a bunch of interesting results. The headliner is, that 49% figure. Claude 3.5 Sonnet new, the new version of Claude 3.5 Sonnet that can hit 49% on SWE-bench verified, which is really impressive. I mean, these are basically resolving real GitHub issues. So this is something that would be useful in practice. So hitting 50%, not at all bad. The previous state of the art was 45%, so that is a good jump. One of the lessons that they share, lessons learned, they say, we believe that much more attention should go into designing tool interfaces for models in the same way that a large amount of attention goes into designing tool interfaces for humans. So in other words, like, you want to care about the user experience for the model. And they give an example. One way we improved performance was to error-proof our tools. For instance, sometimes models could mess up relative file paths after the agent had moved out of the root directory. To prevent this, we simply made the tool always require an absolute path. So if you don't code or whatever, that doesn't sound like it makes sense. Basically, the idea here is just, if you're so you can kind of navigate into a particular file on your computer and kind of code within that file. All the commands you give will be local to that file, and but essentially the problem is, if you want to issue a command that's relevant to a file somewhere else in the tree of files on your computer, you got to step out of your file and then work your way back down the tree. And the model was just kind of struggling with that. So they said, okay, you know what? Just give your instructions, start them in an absolute file path, start them at the top of the tree every time. That's way more detail than you need. Bottom line is, this is user experience for AI models. That's the cool thing here. And you can basically ignore everything I said that's not that.
Well, as a programmer, it was some nifty detail. On to policy and safety, and we've got kind of a pretty interesting story that you probably have not heard about, and that is that the Bureau of Industry and Security has proposed a significant AI regulation that might be very significant, and no one actually noticed because it flew under a radar. So this regulation would mandate US companies to report a large AI model training plans and computing cluster acquisitions to the government quarterly. And what the rule aims to do is collect detailed information on dual-use foundation models. This is, dual use, meaning that it can be used for good and for bad. And the backing for regulation is the Defense Production Act. We talked about it a long time ago, where this was seen as a way to institute these kinds of requirements to protect against bad models. So a lot of conversation has been going on about requiring something like this, reporting if you're trying to train a big model, and seemingly they just went ahead and did it.
Yeah, you can read this as being a follow-on to the Biden executive order in November 2023 that came out. Now, this is I think it was the longest executive order in U.S. history. So the executive order is when the president basically comes out and says, hey, I'm directing all the executive agencies, civics lesson briefly, but like executive agencies means all the active parts of government that are not like the Congress, where laws are written, or the judiciary, where laws are interpreted. That's it. So basically, the president comes out and says, "Hey, this is what's going to happen." BIS is the arm of the Department of Commerce that looks at enforcing a lot of things like export controls and tech policy, that sort of thing. So this is really interesting because they're essentially being given carte blanche. BIS is proposing to allow itself to collect arbitrary information about these training runs. They can send companies, in addition to the reports that you just mentioned, these ongoing reports. And that's its own issue, right? The fact that they're asking for the first time for ongoing reports every so often, like you have to regularly report to BIS. No one's ever seen that happen before. We've seen one-off requests for information. That happens pretty often. That's understood to be part of the executive prerogative. But we've never seen this kind of ongoing thing. That's one thing people are pushing back against. But another is that essentially this request for information can go arbitrarily deep. So BIS can send companies additional clarification questions after they get the initial answers, and those questions have to be answered within 7 days. Kind of interesting, kind of tight timeline, especially for these highly technical questions. And there's no limit really to the scope of the topics that could be asked here. Now, there's an interesting question as to why this is happening now. I think the real lay of the land here is the U.S. government is currently trying to build its capacity to process this kind of information, right? So there's questions about, okay, well, we just saw OpenAI's O1 try to like autonomously break out of a sort of like sandbox setting, and showed some success at doing so. Okay, so maybe loss of control risk is on the table. Who do we alert in government? Like, is there even an office? Is there a capacity to process this information? The answer right now is no, but that's starting to change, and this is one way that change is happening. There's this big debate over whether this is an appropriate use of government authorities. The Defense Production Act it was controversial to invoke it, but from a legal standpoint, I mean, it does seem to rest on pretty solid ground. It authorizes the president to take a very broad range of actions in service to the national defense. And that historically has been interpreted to include not just national defense, but critical infrastructure protection, even energy production. And so when you look through that lens at AI and national security capabilities that come from these models, like, yeah, all of a sudden that actually seems like a pretty damn appropriate use of exactly this. But historically, this has been used, as I said, to do just like one-off information collection. And so people are taking issue with the repeated nature of this, even though there's nothing in the statute that says you can't use this on an ongoing basis. This is just, the first time that we're choosing to actually use this in the way that it is. The other thing, you can see, understandably, people are concerned that the executive order looks like it's an attempt to use emergency wartime powers in peacetime to increase the government's control over private industry. That's been one thing that's been flagged. That is a little bit tricky to push, because the reality is the leading labs are the ones who would have to file a legal challenge to kind of take issue with that. And none of them have shown any interest. They all seem to acknowledge that, yeah, this is a national security relevant technology. This does seem like an appropriate thing to do. And, we'll see if there are legal challenges coming. But so far, it just doesn't seem like that's going anywhere. So I think this will be sticky. I think, part of it is we've now spin up government infrastructure, for better or for worse. I do think on balance it makes sense, but people would complain about, setting up new bureaucracies to monitor this stuff. But I think that, you just have to build that capacity to the extent that you buy into any kind of risk picture, whether loss of control or weaponization or something else.
Yeah, exactly. And just to highlight, so it's very clear, this is a proposed rule at this point, but as an executive agency, you could have legal challenge if they were to implement this rule. And it seems likely, at least according to this article, that something like it will be implemented in the near future, although that's not been the case yet. And speaking of rules and regulations, the next story is about Anthropic having a new blog post that is warning governments that things could go real bad if they don't institute regulations within 18 months. So they are calling for this urgent government regulations, and they highlight the improvement of capabilities as they've been studying in their responsible scaling policy, highlighting that there are increasing risks in things like hacking, in things like chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear contexts, things like that. And they advocate for specific things. They advocate for high quality security practices that mandate transparency, incentivizing security, and simplicity. And particularly they care about focused legislation. So they don't want like a very broad kind of regulation that some have argued was the case with SB 1047. They want these to be very specific and targeted.
Yeah, I'm always amused by that SB 1047. Like, far be it for me to be looking for tech regulation as a startup founder. Not a fan generally, but 1047 was extremely carefully scoped to catastrophic risk, not at first, but eventually, I mean, they kind of whittled it down to the point where it was like, okay, clearly this is, focusing on the WMD side. So, it sort of, anyway, I think there were some interesting questions there about what was going on in Gavin Newsom's head and Nancy Pelosi's head when they pushed for this to be axed. But yeah, I mean, all the standard pushback you might expect to this from all camps. I've seen it all on Twitter or on X. People saying, "Oh, you're trying to slow down, AI development," which it's Anthropic. They're an AI lab, and then people concerned about like, well, you're trying to downscope the range of policy responses here. The approach here, and I've heard this articulated by a lot of people, including Helen Toner. And a lot of other kind of AI policy safety people, don't regulate too soon, too fast, too hard, because I'm sorry. The argument for regulation here is if you don't regulate, there'll be some kind of event, and then you'll get a backlash, and people will overreact. I think this is a very valid concern. It's probably going to happen anyway, to be perfectly honest. I think at this point, with open source being where it is. But yeah, I mean, the other thing too is very little emphasis here on loss of control risk in a context where evidence for that is accumulating rather quickly. And so I'm intrigued by that. The reason I'm intrigued by it is the default strategy right now of all the frontier labs to build an automated AI researcher and trigger like a freaking singularitarian explosion. I know this sounds crazy. This is their plan. This is explicitly and publicly their plan. This is also explicitly and publicly an insanely dangerous thing to do on the default technical trajectory. And yet there's nothing about that here. I can't help but think that that's just because the Overton window just isn't there. The general public just, not thinking all along those lines.
I definitely agree. I think this is strategically worded or phrased to get people on board. In fact, the name of the blog post is the case for targeted regulation. So it's making a case, it's trying to convince people of something. There's a frequently asked question section that includes things like, won't regulation harm the open source ecosystem? Won't regulation slow down innovation? So it's almost like it's debating the side that says there shouldn't be regulation. And actually, this is mostly on that convincing front. So there's not a lot of detail. Basically, what they're saying is we have this responsible scaling policy, and we've had it since September 2023. We think it works well, and it is a good framework. And we think that other AI labs should do something like it. So that's basically the gist of their suggestion for regulation is you should mandate or regulate something that would make other labs scale responsibly. On to the lightning round, and again, jumping back to a point that Jeremy previewed, the first story is open source bites back as China's military makes full use of Meta AI. So the story is about this new AI system, Chatbit, which was trained on military data and is intended for intelligence analysis, strategic planning, simulation training, and command decision making. And it is based on Llama, right? So this is presumably fine-tuned from Llama. And there's a couple examples. So that's one of them. There was also another paper that has revealed the use of Llama 2 for training airborne electronic warfare strategies. And another model that has been deployed for domestic policing in China by aiding in data processing and decision making. So doesn't go according to the use policy of Llama. It does prohibit military applications.
Oh, thank God.
Yes.
Oh.
I'm just gonna say it's not meant to be used like this, but it's also no surprise to anyone that this is what's happening. Basically, anyone who, let's say, introduced cases against open sourcing aggressively, as Meta has pointed out that this is one outcome that would happen. And, well, now we know, here are some examples of it happening.
I don't know. I think Meta's positioning here is just a bit off kilter. The reality is they're using open source as a recruitment play at a time when, frankly, they're not producing the best models in the world, and that's their big challenge. If these were closed source models, nobody would be talking about Meta. That may change, by the way. It probably will with their fleet of H100s and GB200s and so on. But until now, Meta would have been not very interesting as a proposition, and that's critical because you get into a recruitment death spiral then, right? If people aren't talking about you as a going proposition in the AI world, it's harder to recruit, harder to train that next and greatest model. And so they've had to do something, and their something was open source. And I think that made sense for recruitment. It also made sense to some degree for the usual open source reasons, easier to integrate open source developments into their stack, blah, 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 good stuff. Also obvious, as you said, that America's adversaries, geopolitical adversaries, would absolutely leverage this and weaponize it. China is starved for chips. They're absolutely facing a massive deficit on the AI side. We are gifting them our crown jewels every time we take a model like Llama 3.2, like Llama 3.1, like Llama 3, like Llama 2, and we just publish it. And we've known for a long time, and we've talked to people who are familiar with the kind of AI, China AI startup scene, and these guys all have their companies basically running on Llama. Like Meta is setting the bar for Chinese domestic AI capabilities in a big way. It's not the only, there's Quen as well. They had no Quen, but a lot of, even that, like a lot of these big companies are using either the Llama architecture or the models themselves as the backend. Like this is really like Meta, without exaggeration, is propping up the Chinese domestic like defense AI state. That is an actual thing that's happening. And their response then, sorry, you're getting my bias coming through here, but I think it's like, I don't see how this is like, I don't see the counter argument. I'll just read their statement from Meta spokesperson. America must embrace open source innovation or risk ceding its lead to China, hurting our economy and potentially putting our national security at risk. Like that sentence does not make sense. That like to the extent that you are just open sourcing your work, and given that China is behind us right now, you're just like giving them a leg up. To me, this is complete insanity. I'm very open to nuanced arguments from Meta, and I hope that they come. I hope that I'm wrong about this, that there is some interesting way, but I gotta say, like, we work full time in this space and deep in the national security world. This is insane to me. Like, I'm hoping that I hear a good counter argument sometime soon. If not, it seems like we've got a fleet of H100 GPUs at Meta HQ humming along in support of effectively the interests of the PRC or the CCP, and that's not a good look. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, wow, okay. I guess not entirely surprising. That would be a take. I will push back a little bit. I think it's unfair to call it purely a recruitment play, for one. I think there is a real ideological belief that open source will make the technology progress faster. There's also a strategic leaning here on making people use PyTorch and on devaluing the work of its competitors. So not just a recruitment play. And I will say also on that competitive front, to be fair, I think it would be a much bigger deal if they released a 400 billion parameter model. Like at least the 70 billion parameter models, their models are not, they're weaker, so to say, right? So things like Quen and things like O1, I believe, do showcase that there is a domestic possibility for training good LLMs, even if that's harder in China. I mean, there's an argument to be made on the benefits, pros and cons. This is a con for sure. Meta will not admit it, but it's not good that this is happening. And that's something that I think open source proponents also admit, yes, this is an outcome, but we have to weigh the pros and cons.
For sure. And not to do the Mott and Bailey thing, but I will say, so my analysis is through the national security lens. There is a separate question, you're right, about whether it's good for domestic advancement and blah, blah, blah. The reality is that our best models are not open source right now in the West. And we're setting the floor. Like, China's AI startups are using preferentially Meta's models, which means that we are defining the frontier of AI capabilities in China through these releases. So what I was commenting on was, I want to be specific here, was this argument that Meta is making that America must embrace open innovation or risk ceding its lead to China.
Yeah, that is kind of just BS, right?
But that's what my comment was about.
Yeah.
A total, like the recruitment side, and as I mentioned, the kind of software ecosystem side to make it easier to fold into Meta. Totally agree. There is, of course, open source ideology, which I think is sort of the economic argument, not necessarily the national security one. But I mean, I'm fascinated by this. I'm waiting for the counter argument on national security picture specifically. I
doubt it's coming.
It's coming.
Yeah. And a related story, very much related, the story is that Meta is saying that it's going to make its Llama models available for U.S. national security applications. So U.S. government agencies and contractors can now use it for that. Again, that's something that was against their usual user policy. There's now this exception for US and allied government agencies following the unauthorized use of older Llama models by Chinese researchers. So this very much followed up on that front. Meta is trying to, I guess, save some face, presumably, with this move. And, well, I guess it is counterbalancing that to some extent.
Yeah, that'll do it. Like, I think there's an amusing, I don't know, there's just like an amusing picture here of like putting a loaded gun on a table and just like putting a like Post-it note on it that says, "Do not shoot." Okay, we fulfilled our safety requirement. Yeah, I don't know. These licenses only go so far, but nice of them to do that. This is not a bad thing. But yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's in Silicon Valley, a lot of people are pretty liberal, and I do think they would get some pushback for even this much. For
actually, you know what? That's a good point. This is not a trivial. You're right. It's not a trivial call for them to make in that respect. Again, through recruitment lens. Yeah.
And we are almost hitting the 2-hour mark, so I think we'll finish up here. Save the synthetic media and art for next week. Thank you for listening to the episode. Always fun to record these. As always, you can check out the links to the stories in the episode notes, and you can go to lastweekin.ai to get the podcast email with the links as well. As always, we appreciate your comments, your reviews, your Twitter mentions, whatever you want to do. And do be sure to tune in and do enjoy this outro song.
Where tech's on the rise. We've got the latest scoop, open your eyes. From ChatGPT searches who's so wise to Apple's AI touching the skies. It's the last week in AI, swim through time. And like your swing beat, writing digital rhyme. NotebookLlama eyes, zero in sight. Join the dance in the AI spotlight. Episode 188, tech in motion, integrate. ChatGPT finds what you seek with the REPOCOD. Well, take a dig. Apple's AI seat and bright. NotebookLlama, day or night. Eyes of a spinning circuit hum. In the rhythm, here we come. Episode 188, tech in motion, integrate. ChatGPT finds what you seek with REPOCOD. Well, search the sauce with ease and grace. When AI users know that place. ChatGPT, our trusty friend. Unfolding tales that never end. Also in a mission beat so clear. And AI's embracing conquer fear. Apple charts past the dreams of spun. Joy now the future's begun. In the realm of bytes and codes we thrive. Episode 188, the AI's alive. ChatGPT search lies up the way. Apple's abilities lost its way. Last week in AI, feel the groove. Auto-tune beats make you move. NotebookLlama eyes know its light. Retro swing vibes taking flight. Ba-da-da, tech's our delight.